The emergence of COVID-19 has forced the legal industry to rapidly undergo a fundamental transformation. I'm Jack Newton, CEO and co-founder of Clio, the world's leading cloud-based legal software provider. In each episode of Daily Matters, we'll explore what this new normal means for law firms, how legal professionals can find success while working remotely, and how lawyers can best serve their clients during this unprecedented situation. Today's guest is TC Whittaker, the law firm solutions leader for PwC Insights Officer. TC, thanks so much for joining us.
It's great to be here, Jack. Thanks for having me on.
TC, first and foremost, how are you and your family doing?
Oh, thanks for asking, Jack. Everybody's doing well. We're doing well. We're staying at home and following the guidelines that our state and federal government has for us down here. And so we're trying to abide and do all the things we're doing. But appreciate you asking. How's your crew doing? Everybody okay with you?
Yeah, everyone is well, and we sent I think 3 weeks ago today our entire company to work from home on a mandatory basis, shut down our 5 worldwide offices. And, you know, I think thanks to the cloud, and we do drink our own champagne at Clio, 100% cloud-based. And I was pretty amazed. We didn't miss a beat. You know, support's still picking up the phone calls because they've got a VoIP-based phone system that all of our support requests are getting routed through. Our sales team has actually seen an uptick in interest around Clio and the cloud more generally, thanks to COVID-19. And the rest of the business, I think we've just leaned into this as an opportunity to actually grow and change and build some new muscles. So I think I've been personally very, happy with that transition for Clio as a company. And then on a personal level, I've got my house here with my wife and our 3 kids. They're 11, 9, and 7. So a pretty busy house and an interesting age range to try to manage and juggle the homeschooling and work thing along with my wife. So it's been fun is maybe the generous description of it, but everyone's healthy. And there's a lot of things I'm enjoying about this new reality, along with some of the challenges, but all things considered really well. Thank you also for asking.
Excellent.
So TC, tell us a little bit about the changes you've experienced personally as a result of COVID-19 in terms of impacts on your personal life. Tell me how PwC is adapting to this crisis, how you're working with your Insights Officer team through this, and maybe just give us a little bit of context in terms of where you're situated and what kinds of orders are in force in your jurisdiction right now.
Sure. So maybe I'll start with PwC and then I'll work back down into personal. So fortunate to work at a global firm that is very well prepared for this. We are a fully cloud-based firm. We've been that way for a long time. You think about generally like what PwC does and how it sends people all over the world to do all kinds of jobs outside of our offices. It's very unusual for us to be in the office, just with the nature of like our audit, tax, and consulting work that we do. So we had to build our business in such a way that we could be remote and all over the place. So we're kind of fully cloud-based. Now, this is unique and quite different when literally we shut down all the offices, because there are still some needs and things like need IT help and stuff like that you can normally like go in, get stuff fixed or whatever it might be, or for some of those reporting things that the government still requires for us to do on paper. We have big printers and all kinds of stuff like that. So there's some work around that kind of stuff. But for the most part, PwC was well prepared for this, and it's pretty much business as usual for us continuing to deliver for our clients and all of that kind of stuff. So not much change there. For my personal team that I run inside of PwC, we're a very spread out team. While we're headquartered in Atlanta, Georgia, I have people in my team from sea to shining sea, from New York to San Francisco and about everywhere in between. And then I got a big team some folks in Australia, some folks in Shanghai. And so we are used to operating together on kind of a remote basis. So not a tremendous difference there in terms of like how we communicate and work together and collaborate together. I tell my team all the time, I feel like we have about every tool known to man to collaborate with each other. We're a Google firm, so we got all the G Suite and we can do all the video chats, and we got Slack and GChat and text, and I feel like there's like a million ways to stay connected with each other. Actually, though, interestingly enough, I think one of the things that is a little bit unique and different about this, and something that we need to acknowledge. I have a group of CEOs that I meet with, and we meet pretty regularly. There are 10 of us, and this weekend we were meeting and discussing things. And one of the big ideas that we came out of that meeting with was like, listen, there's work from home, and that's in this bucket. And I do that all the time. If I got something going on family-wise, or there's some unique need, I can work from home. Yep. What is happening right now is not work from home. What is happening right now is that I am working in the middle of a crisis, and I am forced to be in my home, as well as everyone else inside my company to be forced inside their home. And those are like two very different things.
I think that's a super important point, TC. Yeah. And I think many people that have always worked from home are also saying to their new work from home compatriots, hey, this isn't normal. And the kind of psychological stress and everything else that you're dealing with, in addition to the displacement of working from home, is an entirely new thing. So don't conflate those things. Don't conflate work from home during a global pandemic and economic meltdown and all the uncertainty and stress that goes along with that with what the day-to-day of working from home looks like.
Right. Yeah. So that was one of the kind of big ideas that we were all circling around and saying, like, absolutely, like, we're all in on this. I think another one that was really interesting was, the level of productivity. So whatever you had in your plan as a leader of your business pre-pandemic, in terms of what you were expecting to accomplish, what you wanted your team working on, and what you thought you could get done in terms of productivity, like, those need to be scrapped and thrown away. And business leaders need to rethink, okay, now what do I think that we're actually going to get productivity-wise? There's a lot of businesses, law firms, the ones that we work with and the ones that you work with, where literally courts are shut down.
Yep.
So if you think you're going to get the same productivity that you would get depending on the type of law you practice, like, throw that out the window, okay? You need to like restart, wad that piece of paper up and get a new piece of paper out and say, okay, really, what is this going to look like now that we're in the middle of this pandemic?
And keep layering on top of there, by the way, the courts are shut down. Your clients are in lockdown. Their businesses have been mothballed for weeks or maybe months. Yep. So there's, this unbelievable wave of impact starting to hit law firms. And maybe, pulling that thread, TC, I'm curious, do you see in the data you're looking at across the law firms that you work with, any trends that are giving you an early view on what the impacts of COVID-19 have been? And maybe before you answer that question, you could actually set the stage for us a little bit in terms of what is PwC Insights Officer? How does it work with Clio and tie into the broader Clio ecosystem? And what kind of service do you provide your clients? And then come back to that earlier question around what are some of the trends you're seeing, and maybe how are you advising your clients on how to navigate this crisis?
Sure. So Insights Officer is a solution built inside of this big, huge firm called PwC, and we're a solution that targets solving problems for small and medium-sized law firms. And one of the things we do, which has been very valuable to our clients, is we cloud enable them from start to finish. Clio is a huge part in that. I mean, a huge part, because when you think about the heartbeat or the center of the law firm and what they do on a day-to-day basis, managing their matters, managing their clients, managing their time, all of those really important things that all law firms are going to be doing, having all of that set up in the cloud, but then the business needs that surround that, because there's many more business needs than that. You got to make payroll, you got to pay bills, you got to have your accounting and your general ledger system. So there's more to it than just that when you think about the business holistically. And that's how we think about our law firms, holistically. So we cloud enable them, and then we actually offer them a service where we take on all of those back office needs for the law firm. So literally doing the bookkeeping, we've built a lot of really cool automation around that. Once we get these law firms cloud enabled, we put our automation in place. Now we got the data working and syncing very seamlessly between all these cloud-based applications. And then we can access that data to start to do some really cool things with it to help the law firms make better decisions about how they can be more profitable, about how they can increase utilization and realization, all those great things that law firms need to pay attention to. One of the interesting things, which leads to the first question, was because we have all this data working together, from payroll to paying, from AP to AR to what's going on inside Clio, and we can sync all that together and pull it all together, we do have an interesting view into what's going on inside these small and medium-sized law firms. And as I mean, this is probably not a huge surprise, we see some of our customers, depending on, a lot of this has to do with the type of law practice. Some of them continue to push forward, and they continue to work with their customers and continue to make money and are doing okay. We see others that are really struggling with insolvency. And I know that's a big thing to say, but that's just the truth. When the spigot turns off and you're a solo practitioner, and whatever it is that your practice type you did to make money, all of a sudden now turns off, that's a big deal. And you can get to insolvency very, very quickly when you look at what you're spending, money going out the door when no money now is coming in the door. And so we have had some real hard conversations with some folks. Now, there are absolutely things we're doing to advise folks on how to manage through this and how to think about conservatively. One of the most important things you need to be thinking about in a situation like this, which is cash flow management. There's no doubt every managing partner, she should be focused on right now, what am I going to do around my cash flow management? And there's some basic tips and tricks.
One question I'd love to ask before you proceed there, just for our listeners that might not be familiar with the concept in terms, what is cash flow? Give us the
Sure.
101 on cash flow and why it's so critical for a business.
Yep. So what we're talking about here is the cash coming into your firm. So this is your clients paying you money versus the cash going out of your firm. So this is you paying your payroll. This is you paying your rent. This is you paying your insurance or your utility bill or whatever it might be. And you look at this in versus this out, and that is going to give us what your overall cash flow is for your business. So a positive cash flow means you have more coming in than you do going out. A negative cash flow or an insolvency or an insolvent position means you have more going out than you do coming in, which is obviously a really bad situation. But when you literally one day just turn off the spigot of what cash is coming into your firm, it's very easy to get insolvent very quickly. Just because there's
you're basically then running against whatever's on your balance sheet. Is that right? You've just got whatever runway of your expenses against your savings. And I believe this to be the case. You can comment on this, I think, more in detail than I would be able to. But my understanding is that many law firms do not have much in the way of cash reserves. They're often operating with less than a month or two of runway, which is, if you turn that spigot off, how long can you cover yourself from an expenses standpoint? So can you maybe just talk a little bit about that, and maybe even how you approach advising your clients in terms of what kinds of savings do you recommend putting in place so that you can weather a storm like COVID-19?
An interesting thing about just the nature of law firms, the majority of them are set up as partnerships, and even a three individual partnership, a law firm, they generally will distribute the proceeds to the partners. And so they get into the situation like you're talking about, where we have a month and a half of cash on hand. In a normal world, in a normal scenario where you can kind of look at your clients and know what they pay you, look at your workload, what matters you're working on, net new matters. That's actually not the worst thing in the world, because you can actually manage based on one month or 1.5 months. But when we find ourselves into this very unique situation that we find ourselves in right now, and this is really kind of unprecedented in what's happened. Of all the financial crises we've ever had, of all the ones I studied about in my MBA program, of the one I lived through in 2008, this is unique. This is way different.
Yeah.
Very, very, very much different. And so now when you only have a month of cash on hand to cover all of your expenses that you might have, you find yourself in a very unique situation in terms of how to manage through this and how to think about how I can now get through this and get over the hump. So you have a law firm, you have type practice type where you have money on retainer, IOLTA, cash. You need to work on those matters first. You need to reprioritize your workload. Work on those matters first, because that's money you've already collected. Now, it's not yours, but you've collected and got it in the bank. Now, if you can do the work to earn that money, you can move it from your IOLTA into your operating and become your cash. Very important. It's kind of an easy thing to do, but if you're the type of firm that does that kind of thing, here's some cash that we can free up right away. The next thing you need to do is you got to stop. When you have reimbursable expenses, you're charging expenses and things that you're going to charge back to your clients, stop doing that. Don't front them the money for that stuff anymore. They need to pay in, and then you pay out. So there's no more float. You're not acting like a bank anymore to your clients. So you can start doing some things like that. And the other thing, which this is really hard, but this is very conservative, and I think a wise approach to this, is I'm telling all the clients now to make 3 buckets on your expenses. You got to get real familiar with your expenses, what you spend your money on. If you're the managing partner or you're the partner group, you need to get in the weeds on this. You need to understand what's going on. And then you need to bucketize them to essential expenses, to nice to have expenses, and to a bucket that I call first to go. And so you need to think about what those expenses look like and put all the ones in your firm into one of those buckets. And the first to go, the decision needs to be made like this. There's no more waiting. There's no more. And think about it as simply as, hey, we order a coffee from Amazon and it gets delivered to the office every week. Like, cut, done, turned off. Like, it needs to be turned off right away. And then you start working your way back into some of the nice to haves, and you start looking at your cash flow. Now that I've cut some of these expenses out, how much longer of a runway have I provided for myself? And so those are some of the few tips and tricks that we're working with some of our clients on right now. The other thing is, when your cash flow inflow just drops and it stops, you got to look for other ways to try to get cash into your firm. We spend a lot of time with our current clients talking to them about some of the, for those in the U.S., talking to them about some of the programs that are available to small businesses right now. And so we have done a tremendous amount around that, and continue to work with our customers about how they can get access to some of that cash that's available to them through the governments.
Great advice on the cash flow side, especially TC. When you're thinking about how do you evaluate your expenses and your revenues to achieve positive cash flow in this crisis, I think there's a few things you can do that are maybe unusual as well. And I'll offer up one tip that Erin Levine shared with me in one of our early episodes of Daily Matters. And she had evergreen retainers set up with many of her clients. And normally she wouldn't ask them to top those up until they've been fully drawn down. And she basically asked her clients in as many words, hey, can you do me a solid and top up these retainers in advance of when you usually would, to help with cash flow of my firm? And I think what she was very happily surprised to see, probably due to the client relationship she's built up over years where there's this amount of goodwill, but every single one of the clients that she asked that question of topped up their retainers in advance of when they would ordinarily do that. And I think it was a good reflection of, Erin does consumer-facing law, I think a great reflection of how much goodwill there is in the demographic of folks that have not been severely financially impacted by this crisis, to help out industries that are, you hear about people leaving 100%, 200% tips at restaurants that they're visiting or ordering out from, better stated. And in your mind, are there other, innovative or out of the ordinary tricks or tips that you'd pass on to our listeners that can help with that cash flow side of the equation?
I don't know if they're so out of the ordinary, but another thing that we are working with a lot of our clients on right now is accounts payable and accounts receivable management. Yeah. On the accounts payable side, I am telling folks, listen, go and talk to the people that you owe money to, the landlord, whoever it might be. Go and talk to them and see if they won't work with you to manage through this cash flow. Say this is a sensitive subject, but this is something I think is real practical advice to say, listen, I want to continue to pay you this rent. I got a great relationship with you. You're a great landlord, blah, blah, blah. But I need you to work with me right here. And we're in a really hard spot, and my business has pretty much stopped. And so what can you do? How can we work through a payment plan? What could this look like? And actually a lot of people have had luck with conversations like that.
I think that's 100% correct. And I, from my perspective as a business owner and somebody that offers subscription services to lawyers, and I think everyone from a landlord to a software provider is in the same boat, where we know things will return to normal at some point, and we would rather have you as a customer or a client or a tenant on the other side of this than we would to lose you or have you fail in this pandemic. And we want to do everything we can to help you survive. And I think it's really important to underscore that you're not the only person that they're having that conversation with, and that their mindset is probably much more amenable to that conversation. And I think there's many lawyers that would have to screw up the courage to even have that conversation, frankly, because it is a tough conversation and a bit of a vulnerable conversation to have, where you need to let some of the bravado and so on wash away a little bit, right? And
that's right.
I think that's going to be the difference between surviving or not in this kind of a climate, though. And I think it's a great example of the kinds of conversations that can actually help you get through this.
Yes. Yeah. I agree. They're not easy. But when you're faced with shutting the doors versus going and having that conversation, sometimes that can muster some confidence, right? When your back's against the wall.
Yeah. How are you thinking about staff expenses, TC, with some of the new legislation coming through in the form of the CARES Act and so on? Are you giving advice, so to speak, in terms of, do you keep your staff on? Do you furlough them? How are people navigating accessing this program? And I know every case is probably different to an extent, but is there any broad-based advice you're giving law firms right now in terms of how to navigate these programs and how to manage your staff expenses as a result?
Yeah, there's no doubt that the largest expense to a law firm, all law firms, regardless of practice type, is payroll and what you're paying your folks. It's just the largest expense, period, full stop. Nothing else is even close, really, to be honest with you. So this is an important one to talk about, because it's a very material thing when you're talking about cash outflow. And so one of the things that I have been talking with folks about and making sure to bring up is that, like, listen, we're in this tough spot, and economically we find ourselves in a really, really hard spot. But I don't always think that making just knee-jerk reactions about people first is always the right thing to do, because I want people to make sure that we're being conservative and taking the right approach to the short term, but also thinking through, like, we will come out of this. It's just a fact. Like, you can look at all of history, and it goes down, it comes up. It's just a fact. And so we need to make sure that, number one, the firm survives through the trough, but also that we're positioned on the other side. Because this is the one thing that I've really been talking to a lot of these managing partners about. And when I get on the phone with them, I'm like, listen, you have built a business. You are an entrepreneur. I know you don't think of yourself like that, because you think of yourself as a lawyer first. And I talk to so many of them. I'm a lawyer, I'm a lawyer. No, you're not. Look at what you've built. You've built a business. You're an entrepreneur. You have done this, and it's the entrepreneurs that, as they come out of this, they're going to see the opportunities, and if they can manage their workflow and if they can manage their people appropriately, they're going to be best positioned to take advantage of what happens when we come out the other side. So I think that while layoffs are real, and it's something that people are absolutely asking me about and talking to me about, I think it's a very individualized to the firm. They need to make that decision based on exactly what's going on inside their business. So just to make a blanket statement like you should do layoffs or you should not do layoffs, I think is wildly inappropriate for me to say, given that each situation is very unique into what a law firm should do. That being said, some of our clients have laid off some people, no doubt. Others are making decisions to keep some folks, and they are using things like the Paycheck Protection Program and other SBA lending programs that are available to them right now to keep their staff and keep their teams in place, because they do want to be able to take advantage when we do come out of the other side of this. Because while I have no crystal ball, I do think that this the way that this economy just literally stopped, like we just ran into a brick wall when they said everybody go home. So we just ran into this brick wall. I am very hopeful, and I also believe that when it gets turned back on, it's going to get turned back on very quickly. Unlike what we experienced coming out of the 2008 recession, which was this very like long, slow, taking forever to kind of tick back up recovery. This one appears to me like, because there was no fundamental flaws underneath anything that happened. Right. There were no big issues. It was just like literally they said, go home. And when they said go home, we stopped spending money. And when you stop spending money, that caused that. So when we turn it back on, we start spending more money. I do believe that we're going to come back. Those that are positioned to handle that business when we come back, I think are going to do well.
The analogy I've attached to really strongly is that the economy has been put into a medically induced coma to save humanity, essentially. And it's going to come out of that medically induced coma. And like you said, hopefully none worse for wear, if we can prevent all of this collateral damage in the meantime.
Yes.
But I do think that the structural underpinnings of the economy, you know, as you pointed out, unlike the 2008 financial crisis, unlike the Great Depression, there's not these structural issues of the economy to worry about. Before we leave the cash flow conversation, I think you made one really important point that I want to underscore as well, which is look at your expenses really, really closely. Do that line by line analysis of your credit card statement and your bank statements, and cut to the bone if you need to. And I think what so many businesses, you know, especially as they start to scale up in terms of size, there's a lot of expenses that you can forget about, and a lot of expenses that quickly became irrelevant expenses the minute that you went to a distributed and work from home environment. And I'm sure there's lots of offices that are, when things do resume to normal, they're going to find a pile of coffee deliveries and other stuff at their doorstep that they've forgotten about. So I think that's one point I just wanted to underscore. And I want to circle back to Insights Officer and just let you wrap up the explanation of Insights Officer, what you're doing there, and to talk about maybe some of the macro trends you're seeing. We dove into that cash flow piece, and some firms, you know, frankly, just struggling with insolvency. Are there other macro level trends that you think are worth talking about?
Sure. So maybe we'll take the Insights Officer piece. Insights Officer piece first. I can tell you, similar to your business, we're signing new business. We're finding firms that have gotten into a spot and they said, like, listen, my clients need me to continue to deliver for them and solve problems for them. But because of the nature or the way my business was set up, or we had this kind of legacy old world mentality in terms of on-premise solutions and things like that, we can't solve problems for our customers anymore, our clients anymore, and we need to get there. So we're continuing to see business come through from that standpoint. This is it's a hard thing. I think it's a sensitive thing to talk about because, when a boat gets capsized, you don't really want the people who come along in the life raft to be like, hey, I told you should have learned how to swim. Like, right. What are you doing? You're an idiot. That's not really helpful to the person who's drowning. You need to throw them a life raft and let's get them into the boat. And
no one needs to be told that they should have had 6 months of savings in the bank to weather this storm. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think it's the same thing for, going to the cloud. I think we have to be careful with this and how we talk to people about this. And we've taken the stance that we want to be, certainly with, we halted all marketing, internally for a while. We just stopped it all. We just cut it off. And we said, let's be real sensitive around this. Because our messaging is take your law firm from old world to new world, the whole thing. And let's go and let's get you on the cloud and let's get you best positioned to run your firm as best as you can. And we honestly thought that messaging might be a little insensitive to some people right now. So we stopped it for a little while. We rethought how we want to message and how we want to go out around that, because we just wanted to be careful not to be those people in the boat who are just saying, hey, you should learn how to swim when we told you to learn how to swim, a year ago.
Yeah.
Not very helpful. But anyway, we continue to see business come in. We continue to help firms go to the cloud, and they're going to be better off for it. A few of our mutual customers reached out to me this week, and one of them down in Texas had one of the nicest things to say. He's like, listen, he said, I am so lucky that we found you guys when we did. He said, the fact that we're on CLIA now, he said, my attorneys are still working. He said, if we would have been, if this COVID-19 crisis would have happened before we met you, TC, and your team, and you guys moved our firm to the cloud, like, whew, man, we would have been in, it would have been a totally different conversation right now. There are some people who are grateful that they made the decision when they did, and we're getting those calls and reach outs from those clients, which is great. It makes you feel good. I'm really grateful to lean in and help them on that piece of their business.
I relate in the sense that you hear these stories about how your technology is able to help law firms survive an event like this, and in some cases even thrive, where they're able to actually eke out a real competitive edge over their counterparts that maybe aren't as well prepared, and actually pull ahead from in the race. And I'm curious what your perspective on the broader constellation of challenges that law firms are facing in this environment, because the cloud is part of it. Mm-hmm. But I think what's really interesting is that I think what you and I have seen in many of the law firms we work with is they embrace the cloud and they make the transition from on-prem technology to cloud-based technology. But in terms of their law firm operating model, they're still a bricks and mortar law firm, and they're still operating their law firm from a people management perspective and everything else, just as they always did. And I think what's really unique about this trend, this particular crisis and the changes it's forcing on law firms, is there's this two-pronged impact where you need to both make the shift to the cloud, and great if you got a leg up on that, but it's not too late. I think many firms are realizing, hey, I can actually make that transition pretty quickly and pretty transparently. But there's this second and almost orthogonal challenge of, how do I set up my team to work remotely and distributed and from home successfully? And it requires a whole new set of muscles and a whole level of trust, maybe that didn't traditionally exist in more traditional law firms. And I'm curious what your take is on that, especially with maybe the experience of having worked at PwC, which is, maybe not totally dissimilar from how a law firm operates from an outside in perspective, but you've really for a long time embraced distributed work, asynchronous work, working from home, and so on. So maybe you could talk about that specific element of this crisis, and any advice you have on how to layer in that capability into your law firm.
It's this interesting idea of the business side of law has been the same for so long. They have done business the exact same way. And the metrics or KPIs that would be used 50 years ago are like the same ones that can be used today. And it's because the business model hasn't changed. It's this wild thing. It's very interesting to think about that as me as an outsider looking in at law, which is kind of this bizarre thing. But I think the reason it hasn't changed is maybe we haven't had enough kind of forward-looking or forward-thinking people thinking about that. And I think that the most important person is missing from the conversation, because law firms, like you said, they're thinking about, okay, how do I cloud enable myself to enable my team to do this, or to enable my firm to move in this way? And we never bring the client into the discussion. And it's like this person, it's the most important person inside your law firm, which is the person who pays you money. They don't actually work for you. And they don't bring them into the conversation. And we don't think about, how do they want to be communicated to? How do they want me to solve this problem for them? What types of things are they actually trying to accomplish right now? I know they're saying this to me, but like, what do they really want me to solve? What is it I'm trying to do? And those real fundamental questions are not maybe getting asked. And I feel like if those questions got asked, all of a sudden, like light bulbs would go off in all these managing partners' heads, and they'd say, oh, I get it. Okay, this is how I need to go to market. This is how I need to interact with my clients. These are the things I need to do. I need to now change my processes because my workflows, the way I do things, that how I think about these problems and solving these problems for my clients. Now, how do I enable those things with great technologies that allow me to work remotely, or that'll allow me to be more interactive? Because this is, you run a software business. We build software inside my business. This is what we do. But software is a tool. That's all it is. It's just a tool to do something. It's like, hey, do you want to dig this hole with a shovel, or would you like me to bring in a backhoe? And they're both tools, shovel, backhoe, both tools. But regardless, we want to get a hole dug. And so I think the question and the appropriate person, the most appropriate person to bring in the conversation is a client, and to think about it through their eyes and their lens. And when you do that, I think that lawyers will start to think about the way that they actually do business. And they'll say things like, rates and hours makes no sense here. Like this makes no sense. The client doesn't want it. It doesn't incentivize me to actually get aligned with what it is that they want. Like, throw this out. This is done. Let's do it a different way. And I think once those conversations are starting to happen, and you see little bitty tiny pockets of that, or at least I do. Every once in a while, I see somebody saying like, hey, let's talk about the client. Like, what are we doing? Let's take a client-centered approach to this. So I see little bitty pockets of that popping up, but I don't see like a mass, like everybody kind of talking in that language, if that makes sense.
I think it makes a ton of sense. And I think it's a huge opportunity for law firms. And this is a great moment to reevaluate all those things. What was the status quo for your law firm? And this crisis, if nothing else, is giving you permission to feed that into the shredder and rethink from the ground up how you do everything. And I think a client-centric approach, and obviously I've got a strong feelings about taking a client-centric approach, just wrote a book on the topic. I think it's a super powerful concept that not a lot of law firms have embraced as fully as they could. And in fact, figuring out how you navigate this challenge, I think a client-centered approach is actually a really powerful way to
Yes.
to solve the problem and have the conversations with your clients. What do you need from me right now?
Yes.
There's some interesting Twitter trends, a week or so ago where somebody was lamenting, I don't need another COVID-19 preparedness webinar from my law firm. Would somebody just give me a call and figure out what I need from them to navigate this? And that's the kind of, I think, client-centered design that could be really impactful. Maybe one question on the law firm operating model that I'm curious, and maybe you've got a perspective based on how PwC runs its business. It feels like this idea of dispersing all profits at the end of the year and essentially resetting the balance sheet to zero at the end of every year actually structurally set up law firms to fail with a black swan event like COVID-19. And we saw lots of law firms fail in the 2008-2009 financial crisis. Do you think law firms need to be rethinking their fundamental operating model, this partnership model? And are there learnings from the consultancy advisory space that might apply to law firms to help them better weather storms like this?
Yeah. So partnerships, obviously been a form of even before we had official partnerships per tax codes and all that kind of stuff. We've had partnerships since the beginning of time.
Yeah.
In a very common business arrangement. I think that what you described, though, in terms of like being prepared, being ready for this type of black swan event, I think it goes beyond the structure of the business, if that makes sense. I think that a publicly traded company with shareholders and shareholder demands on that company to distribute earnings or to do share buybacks can put those companies at risk.
Yep.
And to put them in a bad spot because they're not managing long term. They're managing this quarter and this quarter and this quarter.
Yep.
And law firms and partnerships are very similar. What is my distribution going to be this quarter? What's my distribution going to be next quarter? What's my distribution going to be at the end of the year? And so they're managing to those very short term goals. And so I think that tends to be the danger. Now, there are some, not many. I'm trying to think. I'm just going through some of my customers that were unique, that stuck out in my mind, that maybe were doing it a little bit differently in terms of how they were managing their assets and how they were managing their cash positions. Some were a little more savers, but I attribute that not so much to the business model or lack thereof incentives to the business model, but more about the human beings. I think they were by nature a little more conservative, and they were by nature having like really open, direct conversations with their partners to say, hey, I want to make sure that we're prepared to weather any storm. I have no idea what storm is going to come, but I just want to be in that way. Now, I believe that's a very small percentage of the population. Most human beings don't do that. Most human beings, and we just simply need to turn on the news and watch it, do the opposite of that. They'll spend up until the limit they can spend. Most Americans actually spend beyond that with the advent of credit. And they're just like, hey, it's always going to be like this, and we're going to roll on. I don't know if it's so much and this driven by the nature of the business itself, whether it be a partnership.
And you make a really important point, which is maybe what kind of time horizon are you thinking about your business in?
That's it.
Than anything else.
Yep, that's right.
And law firms need to think carefully about that question as well. And by the way, that might be a feature of the partnership model. If things do go south really quickly, it dissolves really quickly, and you can decide if and when you create a new partnership, maybe with different people calibrated to a different set of conditions and market demand. So it doesn't need to be a negative necessarily. That might be exactly what you want if you've looked at your time horizon for the business as being, something you measure in weeks or months rather than years or decades. Maybe that's really the key decision.
One of the things I was talking with a few managing partners about that have partners is, now might be a time for a capital call. And, you've been paying out distributions to your partners and yourself for years. And now cash flow is tight, and it might be time to actually make a capital call. And that's a hairy thing to navigate through with partners. That's a tough thing. That's you've run a startup. You're not a startup anymore, but you run one. You know what that's like. And it's like, hey, it's time to pass the hat, and we gotta do this. And everybody needs to pony in a little more cash. And right now, in the middle of the COVID-19 pandemic, is not the time you really want to be passing the hat to have people to chip in. But it's a real conversation that a lot of people are having right now inside their law firm.
So TC, maybe to summarize a few of your overall thoughts over this conversation and beyond, in a nutshell, can you tell us what you think will be the differentiator between law firms that emerge from this crisis stronger and those that emerge weaker, or maybe even having failed entirely?
Yeah. I think that the biggest differentiator is going to be when those entrepreneurs, those men and women who they remember themselves, like back when they first started their law firms, and whether they have stayed a solo practitioner or they've since grown it and now they got 10 partners and 15 attorneys or whatever it might be. Put that entrepreneurial hat back on. Remember that human being. Bring that human being back right now, and bring that human being back and all the energy that human being had, and get them focused on the clients. And if you do those sorts of things and position yourself to solve problems for clients, you absolutely will come out of this thing in a positive way, because that's going to influence all kinds of decisions that you make. That's going to influence, what should our process be? What should our technology be? Who are the type of people I should hire to work for me? Do I even have the right people working inside my firm based on all of these decisions? But those kind of like fundamental things. And in my business, I call them guiding principles. We have certain guiding principles in our business these are not strategy. It doesn't have anything to do with that. These are things like gravity. Like, Jack, you can believe that gravity is real or not, but if you step off the top of Cleo's building in Vancouver, gravity's taking you to the ground. Okay, these are just laws of the universe. We have certain laws of the universe that we just adhere to, and they then influence all of the things that we do. And I think if you have some of those that are built around an entrepreneurial spirit, they're built around client-centeredness, like they'll influence all these other decisions that you'll make and all these other things that you'll do. And I think the folks who take a second and say, like, hang on a second, I got an incredible opportunity to pause right here I'm going to put my entrepreneurial hat back on because I'm a business builder and look around, I've done this. And now I'm going to take all that energy and I'm going to focus it and get it really harnessed in the right direction. And if they do have other people that work with them inside their firm, the power of the collective all going towards one thing or all going towards the same direction, that's when it's like magic happens. And I'm sure you experienced it at Clio when you've got everybody on the same page and we all know what our mission is. And we say, we're going to take that hill and this is what we're going to do to take it. It's like, it's crazy powerful. And then me, oftentimes I just got to like get out of the way because I just like got smart people coming this way and smart people coming that way. I'm like, oh gosh, I just got to get out of their way so they can accomplish. But I think it's those people who are going to find that they're going to, number one, start doing things a lot differently. And number two, be positioned very well to serve clients when they come out of this thing. And when you take that kind of mindset, everything's on the table. It's like there's no sacred cows. Everything can be reassessed and rethought about, and nothing can be like, let's scrap this. I don't care if we've done it that way for 10 years. All right, we're in a pandemic. Get with the plan. We're going to do this differently now. And you get a great opportunity to kind of take and move forward with some new ways of doing things. I think there's a lot of opportunity in that. I know for one, I've been pushing my management team like crazy around that right now. Like we need to be better. What are we doing wrong? Let's blow stuff up. Let's think about new ways to do this. This is our opportunity to do this. Like let's get real creative right now about how we want to solve problems for our customers. And we've been obsessed with that lately. And I think folks that do that, and I think we'll probably do well coming out of this.
Yeah, if there's a silver lining to all of this, there's the permission to be creative and permission to reinvent and permission to, roll a grenade into some of the old stuff that didn't work. And I think law firms are a ripe battleground for that to be happening. Yeah. TC, really enjoyed this conversation. I'd love two questions to wrap up. One, if folks want to learn more about Insights Officer, where do they go? And my final question will be if you had some parting advice for our listeners, something you want to impart to them either as human beings or as legal professionals, what would that be?
Yeah. So if you want to learn more about what we're up to and how we're serving law firms, go to www.insightsofficer.com. You can go check us out there. And if you want to hear from us, you got a little link there you can click on and put your information in, and we'll contact you in 24 hours to get back in touch with you. And Jack, I appreciate you asking that question. I have a weekly stand-up with my entire company every Monday. And something that I have been talking about every Monday since this really happened is we've been talking. I've been talking extensively with my entire business around grace and what that looks like, and how we need to have grace for each other, and how we really need to have grace for ourselves right now. And we do this really interesting thing as human beings where we judge others by their actions, but we judge ourselves by our intention. And we say like, oh, I'm not a bad dude. Like, I know I maybe didn't do that right there, but like I had a good intention. But other people, we just really judge them by their actions. And so right now, I think more than ever, and this is something we talk about a lot, is that we have got to have grace for each other, because in all of our lives, there is a tremendous amount of stress and pressure right now. And sometimes we just need to take a moment, take a breath and say like, listen, I know my house is crazy and my 4 kids are going nuts, and my wife is doing the best I can, and I'm doing the best I can to deal with this. Okay. And this other person I'm working with on my team, or this other customer that might be working with, they got stuff that's going on with them that's really causing a lot of pain. And like, let's have a little grace for each other right now, and just take a moment, take a breath, and give that grace to each other so that we don't have to hold each other up to these incredible standards that no one could ever meet in a time when the pressure and stress levels turned up to an all-time high. And then just as importantly as you do that for others, you got to do that for yourself. Like, you have got to give yourself that same grace, because if you don't, you'll just burn yourself up. You will absolutely burn yourself up. So that's something we've been talking a lot about in my team, inside my company. And I think it's important, which is why I talk about it so much.
That's a really important and meaningful parting thought. Thanks for that, TC. Had a really great time having this conversation with you. Lots of useful insights. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks, Jack. I really appreciate it. Good to speak with you.
Thanks for joining us on Daily Matters today, a podcast from Clio. Rate and review wherever you get your podcasts and subscribe so that you never miss an episode. Daily Matters is produced by Andrew Booth, Sam Rosenthal, and Derek Boland, and hosted by yours truly, Jack Newton. Thanks also to Clio, the world's leading cloud-based legal technology provider, for supporting this podcast. If you'd like to learn more about Clio, please visit clio.com.